Our next speaker has some presentations to make. He's spent from 2003 to 2006 exhaustive study of the medical evidence. He's done a DVD about the murder of number 35, the death of number 35, referring to Kennedy, 35th president, at Speers, and he's done a lot of work on the House Select Committee and other manipulation of the medical evidence in the case. So this is independent research, and hasn't got a book out yet, except he says he has an expanding one online. Maybe that's what books will be in the future, just chapters that become books over time.
Mistakes on, yeah.
That's right, there you go. So,
without the embarrassing mistakes. Hopefully you can catch it before somebody else does. You can go back and check.
That's true. It's like the memory hole for Winston. But anyway, this is Pat Speers, and then after that, we're going to have by remote Dr. Cyril Weck. Let me give you this.
All right. Where should we put this clip? All right, Techie, where do we put the clip? Where's the best spot for the clip? Right here? Okay. All right. I don't want to be in everybody's way because my presentation is very much a visual one, and I want people to be able to see what the heck I'm talking about for a change. And, whoop, get old, you need some glasses. All right.
There's also seats up here for people that are staying in the back.
There are a couple seats here, right up front. All right. As stated, I've spent a lot of time on the medical evidence, but recently I've tried to put my focus on the actual original crime scene photos and a lot of the crime scene evidence to see if there's anything I can spot that will shed new light on that. And one which I spotted the other day, actually I don't think she's here tonight, but Kathy Beckett was here last night. She let me hear a copy of first day evidence because I didn't feel like paying $80 for it online or whatever they were charging. And I looked through it in the first day evidence photos. I'm like, that's interesting. And then I did a comparison. And as you see, the box on the left here was taken on November 25th. And it has writing up in the corner, which is, this is where the box that Oswald, is there a problem?
He needs to, I think he needs to set in his computer to make it come out that port.
Oh, I'm not even up. I made an assumption. Did you put it on slideshow?
It's not on slideshow yet. I have to do
Technical problems.
Here we go.
Yay! Is there a way to just make the slideshow the whole screen?
It should be.
Yeah, remove that line.
View, I think. Is it view?
Maybe turn off the room lights on.
Slideshow.
There we go.
Okay.
So
All right.
the
So now we're there.
In the back full of room lights are behind the door back there.
All right. So one of the things I noticed, this is just something I've not on my website yet. The box on the left is the box that Oswald supposedly sat on while firing his rifle and killing President Kennedy. And one of the damning pieces of evidence was that his palm print was found on that box. Well, they didn't take any pictures of the box on November 22nd. They just couldn't be bothered. What they did is tear off a corner of the box, and then they went and they supposedly identified it as Oswald's palm print that night. But on the right side of the photo of the slide here is a piece of evidence entered April 22nd, 1964, when the head of the crime lab, Lieutenant J.C. Day, testified. And he said, as you can see, my signature is at the bottom there, and I wrote, I found that it was Oswald's palm print, and I wrote my name on it, and you can see down at the bottom, it says J.C. Day, and he even drew a picture of the box, and he drew a little corner. Well, the problem is that when you look at the crime scene photo from the November 25th when they did the reenactment, and they put the torn piece of cardboard back on the box, his signature's not on there. So he lied, or perjured himself, I don't know. He might have just been an innocent mistake. That's why I write white lies or a dark truth about when he found Oswald's palm print on that piece of cardboard, because on November 25th it was not there. Okay, so that's just something I found recently. I just decided to throw in. Jim recently on Jim DiEugenio on Black Op Radio kind of threw down the gauntlet and said, like, is that the expression? Anyhow, said that he believes that my evidence studies on the bag demonstrate that the bag that Oswald supposedly carried his rifle into the building is not the bag that's in the National Archives today. And well, I got started on studying the bag. I was trying to demonstrate that what did I do with my bottle?
Right behind your computer.
Hiding. I was trying to demonstrate that the bag, people generally talk about the bag, they talk about the length of the bag, and that Bill Frazier, who said, he and his sister both said the bag was not as long as the bag would need to have been to carry the rifle. And so people just focus on the 27 inches versus the 38 inches, but they also identified the width of the bag, and he said it was only 6 inches wide. Well, I've been studying the paper bag that was taken out of the building, and it's almost 11 inches wide. And I show in the middle there, the red shape is the size of the bag that he saw on the back of his, laid across the back seat of his car. Another technical problem. The red shape is the bag, the size of the bag that Frazier said was on the back seat of his car. The blue shape is the size of the bag that his sister said she saw Oswald carry to the car. And the light blue shape is the size of the bag that was taken out of the building. And the actual size of the bag, when you figure in the width and the length, it's way over twice as big. So it just doesn't make any sense that, Frazier that night would see an object. He saw an object on the back of his car, and that night he identified, that he would suddenly it would be twice as big as he remembered it being. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But so I went from there and I studied the bag further, and I realized, as you can see, that the length between the two folds by the light blue line is about the same, the bag in evidence and the bag that was taken out of the building, but the width is way off. And I decided to recreate that photo as best I could, and that's me with a beard. I look like a sea captain. And as you can see, it just doesn't make sense. And this is the photo that John McAdams said was crackpot photo analysis. And I tried to point out to him on his forum that this is how the FBI determines whether bank robbers are the bank robbers in a photo. If a 6'6" guy is in the photo, and then the suspect is, or if the suspect is 6 foot tall, and they put him in the spot in the bank where he is in the camera, and then they try to match up the heights and to see if that would be the guy. And sure enough, I tried to duplicate what they do, and the bag is just much wider. And then this is a more recent one I've just taken. I found this photo. This photo of the bag is very rare. I found it in Judy Bonner's Investigation of a Homicide book, in a very rare book. And as far as I know, it's never been online or anywhere else. And it's very clear also by the crinkles at the bottom of the bag that that's not the bag that's in the archives. All right, to the medical evidence. As a lot of people, I got sucked into a rabbit hole and started studying the Kennedy case. And I read Lifton's book, and I read Grodin's book, and I read a lot of these books. And I was just Harrison Livingston's books, and and of course I actually read Posner and other books too. And I couldn't make up my mind on what to think about the medical evidence. So I decided, heck, I'm an intelligent guy. I live near UCLA. I can go to the UCLA Biomed Library and start studying actual medical wounds, gunshot wounds, to see what they look like, to see if what we're told makes sense. And I've been very controversial since then, because my whole study is based upon the fact that the medical evidence, that the autopsy photos are the actual autopsy photos, the x-rays are the actual x-rays. And some people just don't want to actually study what the evidence shows because they're so convinced that it's fake. Well, when I studied what the actual evidence under the assumption that it's the real evidence, it doesn't show anything what the experts have been telling us. To me, it's a lot easier to think that experts lie than that they would go through this whole preposterous, create evidence that doesn't show what they say it shows. Anyhow, so as you can see, in 1963, they created a face sheet at the autopsy, and that put the back wound at the level of the shoulder tip. And then when the doctors were asked to testify, they were asked for help, because in the executive session, January 27, 1964, General Counsel J. Lee Rankin says, there's a problem. The bullet came from above, and yet the back wound is below the throat wound on the face sheet, so we're going to need some help from the doctors on this. Well, they clearly provided the help, because all of a sudden the back wound is up on the base of the neck. And Dr. Humes actually perjured himself on this because he said he used measurements to create the drawings. And Skip Rydberg, the actual artist, said that he did not use the measurements. And in an internal memo, Arlen Specter acknowledged later that no measurements were used to create the drawings. So that's one lie that we know occurred. Anyhow, then in 1978, the HSCA, Dr. Michael Bond testified for the HSCA investigation, and now the back wound is back on the back below the shoulder tip, as we thought it was all along, and that creates a lot of problems for a certain person. Dr. Humes. Dr. Humes always said, "Oh, it's 14 centimeters." You know, I stand by my measurements. Well, over the years, for whatever reason, a lot of people didn't do the measurements. I found a lot of books that said the book is right on the base of the neck, right? Just like the 14 centimeters says. And so I decided, I don't think that's really the base of the neck. So I just got a CD case, which turned out to be 14 centimeters, and I put it across the back of my head there and measured down. And you can see the face sheet was correct, and the drawings, the Rydberg drawings, were not. And so anyhow, we know that it's a historical fact that certain figures lied, and one of those is Arlen Specter, sadly enough, current senator. And we know this not because he thinks that a back wound is on the, because in his autobiography he admits he saw the autopsy photo on the day of the reenactment, that when they reenacted the shooting. And so in the middle there is the autopsy photo that he saw, which clearly places it on the back below the shoulder line. And yet there's the drawing to the right, which shows it at the base of the neck. Well, a few days after the reenactment, Arlen Specter had Thomas Kelly from the Secret Service testify, and he says, "On what basis did we establish the back wound location?" And Thomas Kelly says that they used Warren Commission Exhibit 386, the one that shows it at the base of the neck. Well, New York Times photographs from the reenactment show that that's not where it was, that it was actually down below the shoulder line where the chalk mark is in the photograph there. So Specter was taking perjured testimony from Thomas Kelly because Thomas Kelly is the one who showed him the autopsy photo. So both men knew that it was actually on the back, and they collaborated on spreading the lie that it was actually at the base of the neck. And that's irritating enough. They continued on to tell a few other lies, and that this is from the actual reenactment. You can see the look on Specter's face, thanks to the History Channel, and down the left corner there when he realizes that the trajectory rod doesn't come close to where the chalk mark is. And Lyndall Schoenfeld of the FBI actually testified that it approximated the location. And so what does Specter do? What do they put into evidence? Do they show people that that's, the left in the photograph in the left-hand corner, that's what approximated means? No, they show the photo in the right-hand corner. That's the exhibit they put into evidence, which doesn't even show the back wound location. So Specter had Kelly lie about what location they used, and then he used a photograph that didn't show the location. I think, he would... And when he testified for the HSCA, he actually was very concerned, and I think this is why. I think he knew that they were about to bust him, and they didn't. Okay, the other lie that Kelly told was that he said that the Connolly seat was 6 inches inboard from the door, and that this brought the trajectory into line. And this 6-inch lie is continued on. Vincent Bugliosi repeats it in his book. And this is from the Beyond the Magic Bullet, but the same animation was used in Beyond Conspiracy. It's Dale Meyer's animation. And in that, they show this overhead view, and they say, conspiracy theorists are liars because they say Connolly was in front of Kennedy. But as you can see, and they slide him over 6 inches, he was really 6 inches inboard of Kennedy. Well, the HSCA released the schematics of the limousine, and it shows it's only 2.5 inches inboard. So Myers was inaccurate. And so I have a whole chapter devoted to my feud with Myers where I debunk a lot of his animation. And a few of his devotees confronted him on it, like, Pat Speer is really going after you. So he started this whole thing on his website where he kind of tried to debunk me or, say what a liar I was or whatever. But in that, he ended up admitting almost everything I said, including that the seat was actually 2.5 inches inboard. He claimed that the seat was 2.5 inches inboard from the door, but he slid it 6 inches inboard because Connolly was really sitting 6 inches inboard, like he had one butt cheek off the side of the seat. And it would be too confusing to the viewers to see that Connolly wasn't sitting in the middle of the seat, so they just slid the whole seat over. So, Dale Myers, I think, is up there with Specter as far as liars. And then, but he's not alone. The HSCA, they lowered the back wound back to where it belonged. But I think probably Robert Blakey, they wanted everything to add up. So they brought in a guy named Thomas Canning who worked at NASA, and they allowed him to study the wounds and estimate where the trajectories of the wounds would point back to. And of course, they all pointed back to the sniper's nest. Well, in order to do that, they gave him carte blanche to move the wounds. And so this shows that on the left is the doctor's drawing of where the back wound was, and on the right is in Canning's drawing. He moved it up above the first rib there. And because at the level of the back wound, there's a rib, and the bullet would have had to go through that rib in order to exit the throat. So Canning just moved it up above it. The doctors didn't even depict the rib because it was too confusing. But Canning just moved it up above it. So he moved it back to where the Warren Commission had it. And when Jim talks about the media, and some people talk about the media's problems, and I was talking to Randy Benson, no one in the media caught this. These exhibits were published back in the 70s, and no one caught this. No one caught, like, wait, the trajectory guy is moving the wounds around. Okay, now let's get to the head wounds. When Josiah Thompson's book came out, one of the exhibits he had in his book was he showed how this is the autopsy drawing of the Rydberg drawing of the head wound, that the angle of it didn't match up right, and that if you match the head as on the right to Kennedy's actual head position, the bullet would have entered from below, like someone was on the back of the car shooting him. And so that didn't sit right, particularly since so they decided to have the Clark panel convene, and these were some top doctors that were all related to the government in one way or another, had done government work and things, but they were all supposedly independent, and they got together in secret, and they ended up moving the head wound and saying, like, well, the reason why that trajectory doesn't work is because it really did enter the top of the head at 4 inches. And one of the most shocking things I discovered in my research is that all the early newspaper articles said, confirms Warren Commission findings. There's no early article, not one, that says, by the way, and the head wound was 4 inches off. Until 72, I think it was, right before Cyril Weck was about to go, and he would have blown the whistle on this or whatever. Then they say, like, by the way, it was moved 4 inches. Then that's the first time I saw it. There's an article I've been able to find on this. Anyhow, and also notice that there's a thin line on the photo, on the drawing, that connects where the bullet enters, that goes to the back of Kennedy's eye. And that's supposedly where the fragment went, the largest fragment they found, and they found it behind Kennedy's eye. Okay, so since the Clark panel moved the wound 4 inches, there was the HSCA panel got together, and these were all friends. 4 of the panelists were actually working on a book with Russell Fisher, the head of the Clark panel, with a month before they went to the archives and they looked at the photos. And you know who funded this book? The Justice Department. It was funded by the Justice Department. It was a book of forensic pathology. And that was never revealed that, by the way, these guys all have a conflict of interest because they're all friends with this guy, that they're supposedly reviewing his findings. Anyhow, so they all found that the red dot, or the red shape on the Grodin photo on the left, up in the cowlick, they said that was the entrance. But they never really looked where the autopsy doctor said it was. And I did, and above where the brain matter is there, I see a circular shape about roughly at the 1 o'clock position that I think is the actual bullet entrance that they saw at the autopsy. And conveniently, when the HSCA released their drawings of it, as you can see from comparing the photo on the left to the drawing on the right, they kind of made that wound disappear. It was an inconvenient wound. Okay, and the other main reason that one of the reasons cited that they moved the head wound was that they found this fragment on the back of the head right by an entrance high on the back of the head. And the thing is that none of the autopsy doctors saw this fragment, and there's a lot of different theories on this fragment, but I'm like, well, maybe, let's just try to figure out where things are. And I matched up the 2 fragments that are in the actual forehead on the top blue line, and I matched up the relative size of the skull, and then I noticed right behind the eye, there's a fragment, and that's the fragment that the doctors removed at autopsy. It's not on the back of the head. Dr. Cyril Weck couldn't find it when he reviewed but he was so convinced that the Fisher panel, the Clark panel, could not be incorrect, that he actually, in his initial findings, he actually drew a fragment at the back of the head. But later on, in a different book, he admitted that he didn't see it there. But anyhow, it's because it was behind the eye, and this is something which a lot of people are mad at me because they think that fragment is proof of conspiracy. I think it's just proof that the HSCA, the Clark panel and the HSCA were incompetent or liars. And then if they'd actually done their research, that's the thing, these consultants were all brought in, and they were just showing some stuff. Hey, what do you think? Do you think that there's a wound at the back of the head? And they're like, oh yeah, look at that, look at that fragment. Well, if they'd actually did their detailed study, they would have seen that on the autopsy face sheet on the back, Dr. Boswell had done a drawing, and there he clearly depicts fractures in the front of the head, in the eye sockets. And they discussed this, vomer crushed. These are all signs of fractures across the front of the face. And when a bullet does hit a skull, that's the thinnest bone. It's back behind the eyes, and that fracture is the clearest. And the one I took some of my research on the X-rays of the radiology form, and that's the one thing that some of the people were willing to sign off on. They said those fractures are not on the back of the head; they're in the the occipital. They're occipital fractures. And this was a fractured orbit analysis, and what they call the fort fractures that cut across from one side of the eye socket to another. And so, okay, so Pat Speer is here. And I'm up against. I have two ones there for some reason. I'm up against these experts. Well, one of the things on my video part one of my video series, I decided to shock people because I got footage of Dr. Michael Bodden's testimony, and he was supporting the Clark panel and moved the wound. And he went further though, and he actually said that you can identify an exit on the skull too, which he actually says in his testimony that Dr. Humes testified about a beveled exit on the skull, when Dr. Humes said they could not find a beveled exit on the skull, and the only exit they found was on the fragments that were brought in later that we found on the car. So he totally misrepresents it, and then he shows them the beveled exit on the skull, and he shows them on this autopsy photo, but he has it upside down because he has the intact skull above the bullet hole, and then in his drawing in the right-hand corner, he's got the bullet hole exiting, and there's the open skull is above it. So he testified with his own exhibit upside down. So he's admitted to researchers he really doesn't understand that autopsy photo. So that's our experts for us. Anyhow, and so the HSCA, because the moved head wound, and Kennedy was leaning very far forward, the logical conclusion would have that it would have blown the top of his head off and it wouldn't have exited towards his forehead. So they had Thomas Canning, who moved the back wound. They had him estimate as well the position of Kennedy, at the time of the head wound. And amazingly, he ends up saying that Kennedy was sitting fairly upright. And that's the third one, the calibration photo. He made they created all these simulations, and as you can see, it doesn't remotely match Z312. It's supposedly the same. The third photo over supposedly matches the Kennedy in the Zapruder film, and it's a complete lie. In fact, the second drawing over is the doctor's approximation of how far Kennedy would need to lean over in order to make this single bullet theory work. And over on the left is Canning's approximation of how far Kennedy was actually leaning based upon the Croft photo taken at frame 161. And so Canning moved the back wound higher, and then he says that Canning is leaning 14 degrees forward in that photograph. And the irony is that in the calibration photo, he says that Kennedy's leaning 8 degrees forward. So the actual position of the NASA expert brought in by the HSCA, and none of this was caught by the media or anybody, was that Kennedy was hit in the back, sat up in the car, and then got shot in the head. The exact opposite of what everybody knows happened. All right, and Canning also lied or misrepresented because the bullet exited on the right side of Kennedy's head and it entered in the middle of the head. He had to have Kennedy's head turned very far to the left. And I analyzed the degree that he had it, and if so, Kennedy should have been in profile to Mary Moorman when she took her photograph at Z315 instead of in profile to Zapruder. So it's just obviously a complete fraud. And as if to make it into a joke, Canning, when he testified, he realized he testified a few days after Michael Bodden, but he realized that Michael Bodden had said that the exit on the side of the head was slightly below the level of the entrance on the back of the head. And this created problems for him because as you move it down, what else happens? It goes out because that part of the head is on a slant. And so if it goes out, that changes the rear trajectory and it moves the wound from the sniper's nest over to the Daltex building. So he had to somehow make it all work, and so his solution was just to shrink Kennedy's head so that the same position on Kennedy's skull is in three-dimensional space. And he testified, when he testified on the first exhibit up top, he testified that that was based upon exact measurements of Kennedy's skull on the x-rays. And then he just, I'll just arbitrarily shrink it 7% to make it work. All right, so what really happened with the back of the head? In 1966, the doctor said this is autopsy photo on the left represented a wound on the posterior skull. Well, in 1967, they were brought back in by the Justice Department to rewrite. Oops, sorry. To rewrite the a new version, and all of a sudden that photo was of the back of the head. And ever since then, the official position that photo was of the back of the head. And I don't believe it, but I'll show you why I don't believe it. I studied it, and one of the things I came up with is that there's, in the uncropped versions of this photograph, like the one in Harrison Livingston's book, there's a drainage hole on the autopsy table in the distance, and Bugliosi in his book, strangely enough, says that this is proof that the photograph was taken from above. But one more minute, okay. Yeah, I have a ton of stuff. I just wanted to give you people a sample. So anyhow, Bugliosi, but I tested it at different angles, and I concluded it's the back of the head. And then when you look at it at the back of the head, sure enough, there's an entrance wound right where they said it was, if you could see. And then it's over to the on the right-hand side. And then none of the other versions of this photo, whether Dr. Baden or Dr. Wecht even, nobody ever accounts for that entrance wound right there. They pretend it doesn't exist. And then you compare it to the x-rays. On the left-hand side is the pre-mortem x-ray, and on the right-hand side is the post-mortem x-ray. And there is a dark shape, as you can see in the right-hand corner, right where that entrance wound is. So I think that the entrance wound was where the autopsy doctor said it was. And from there, a whole things open up. I think that the bullet, since the entrance low on the head does not connect to the exit high on the head, I've explored whether or not that's a separate entry. And the Parkland doctor, Dr. Clark, the guy who first looked at Kennedy's head wound, he said it was a tangential entry. And in the target car, when they filmed that show, they inadvertently missed and they hit the side of the head and they recreated the wound. As you can see on the right, that's where they hit it, where it supposedly hit on the top of the head, and it just blows the whole head off. But the one on the side, on the left-hand side of the slide here, that shows, I think, pretty much what happened. And the Harper fragment shows beveling of entrance and exit, which would indicate that that was true. And the X-rays show that something went down the neck, so that means that the bullet that entered low on the head actually went down the neck. And the HSCA said, no. There was that's all artifacts in the X-rays. That black line, which seems to show a bullet path, that's just air that backed up from the trachea, and it just happened to back up the side of his neck there. And then I also studied what would happen if a bullet did enter low on the head and go down the neck, and it would create inability to grasp, and you would lean over to the right, and you wouldn't be able to talk. And that's exactly what happened to Kennedy between frames 224 and 313. And then on the right here is Martin Luther King's...
Excuse me, inability to grasp or gasp?
Grasp.
With hands?
The hands. So Kennedy reached up with his hands, but he couldn't grasp anything. And that's a sign of cerebellum damage. Anyhow, ultimately it might come down to having X-ray experts, radiologists, restudy this and see if there's a sign a bullet came down the neck. On the right is Martin Luther King's X-ray, which does show a bullet going down the neck, but it was a bullet that broke up. It was hunting ammunition. On the insert, the middle shot is a different angle on Kennedy's X-ray, and it certainly seems like there's a lot of disruption in the neck there, beyond just a bullet passing harmlessly through, which they all said was a survivable wound. So that's my interpretation of the wounds, and I hope people build on that and not just say, "Oh, the wounds, all that evidence is fake." Well, I think maybe this is an avenue people should explore, assuming the evidence is real, and then trying to